Hey guys, what's happening? Niyat here with Film Comics Explained. Although a cube only has 6 faces, there are countless ways one can interpret Vincenzo Natali's debut feature, Cube. Through its Kafkaesque paranoia and class-based discourse to its penchant for stomach-turning tension, Cube manages to point towards endless philosophies of life. And by cramming vastly different characters into an extremely tight space where they remain interdependent on one another, these philosophies often take center stage despite the incredible set design, inventive camera work, and thrilling pace of the film. The film starts off with an extremely memorable moment, but also one that is slightly obscure given we never see this character again. Here, a distraught man named Alderson examines the interior of the cube, choosing which sealed exit to pass through. Unfortunately for him, he makes the wrong choice and is immediately sliced up into chunks by a trap which was lying in wait. We then meet our 5 strangers, all dropped into this mysterious cube with no memory of how they got there. We have Quentin, a divorced cop, Worth, a nihilistic office worker, Holloway, a doctor, Levin, a gifted math student, and Ren, a famed prison escapee. Already, we can see a bunch of conflicting personalities at play. At first distraught, they slowly team up in an attempt to figure out this bizarre maze of cubes. As they discover some of the adjacent cubes are booby-trapped, they figure out that they should boot each before entering, checking whether or not they can make safe passage. Needless to say, this doesn't work and Ren is quickly laid waste by an acid trap, melting through his face and brain in a few gloriously grotesque seconds. They continue on, discovering more and more about the cubes, based primarily on an obscure numbering system revolving around prime numbers, learning the fact that each cube is moving, signaled by frequent tremors. However, progressing through with this partial knowledge, they are quickly caught off guard, causing their differences to rear up and tempers to flare. Worth reveals he was part of the team who designed the cube, and Quentin and Holloway show their differences when Kazan, a mentally disabled man, joins their ranks. Levin's maths becomes central to their progression, but as they meet more roadblocks, Holloway falls to her death as a result of Quentin letting her go. Quentin attempts to dominate the recessive Worth, and Kazan shows his value as his mathematical genius is the key to unlocking the final part of the puzzle. After cracking the puzzle, as they rush towards the exit, Quentin's ugly side rears its head, attacking Worth and Levin. As he jams one of the levers through Levin, killing her, Worth is forced to pull Quentin back, who is torn in half by the movement of the cube. Kazan emerges from the cube, alone but free, and steps out into an overwhelmingly white light which consumes him. Throughout the film, the characters butt up against one another, bringing their different worldly experiences, ideals, and fears to the table. Here we have a ton of pairings, Holloway's wisdom butting up against Levin's youthful blind optimism, Quentin's pro-establishment mentality against Holloway's conspiracy-ridden distrust of the government, and Worth's nihilistic tendencies overruling the notion of progressing through the cube at all. One particularly memorable moment is where the group argue over whether Kazan should be left behind as they traverse a room with a sonically triggered trap, given his tendency for untelegraphed outbursts. Quentin, channeling his inner cop, argues for what he believes to be the greater good, sacrificing Kazan to keep the majority of the team moving. Holloway rejects this notion of a greater good, pointing out that they can save everyone if they only try, and Levin sits somewhere confusingly in between, exclaiming,
"We'll come back for him."
But Holloway quickly rebuts this blind optimism, saying,
"That's a lie and you know it."
In this way, we can see Quentin is supporting the overarching establishment, while Holloway instead acknowledges each of them as individuals with their own importance. This establishes a dialogue of organizations in a capital-driven society between the one and the many. Scholar Miguel Laura has explored this, suggesting the cube itself denotes this exact struggle. Laura argues that each cube in the maze is symbolic of a business or organization, which, in a capital-driven society, people are forced to become a part of. There are signposted entry and exit points to these organizations in the form of recruitment opportunities, interviews, and raises. But once an individual enters that system, they're forced to work with people of different personalities, requiring them to band together as to find their way up and out of these seeming dead-end organizational roles. Laura suggests that people's drive to exit the system is driven by their personal objectives, as our characters are driven by their own goals to exit the maze. But the maze, of course, has other plans. It consumes them, forcing them into places and states incomprehensible to any single individual, hoping to keep each individual or employee in the business sense tied to their post. According to Laura's analysis, there is a way out of the maze, but it's so obscure and so confusing to conceive that most people will remain within the system as its rules become more familiar. In other words, Laura suggests that business, as represented metaphorically by Cube, is a trap for wayward individuals, which throws them into a system they can never fully comprehend and thus can never leave. But Worth's words within the film go even further than this, tending to the nihilistic. At his most vulnerable, he exclaims,
There is no way out of here!
and as he is slowly revealed to have been a contractor who designed the outer shell, he delivers an impassioned monologue.
This may be hard for you to understand, but there is no conspiracy. Nobody is in charge. It's a headless blunder operating under the illusion of a master plan. Can you grasp that? Big Brother is not watching you.
This truth can be read one of two ways. Quentin and Holloway take it as a defeatist, nihilistic perspective which exclaims nothing matters, so why bother? But much like the common misconception that existentialism is a negative philosophy, this realization actually frees them and us from the conundrum Laura proposes. By understanding that there is no master plan, that big business, and by extension, the cube, is, in fact, a fruitless exercise that those within it are made to believe is a coherent, meaningful, and singular object, the subjects of organizations are liberated. It becomes eminently clear that, despite the way out being obscure and out of sight, that there is a way out, and that it is most certainly attainable. As a result, it's no mistake that Worth is one of the two remaining survivors at the film's close. The other survivor is, of course, Kazan, and his position within all these organizations, and even the group itself, is somewhat different. His rather outdated, stereotyped, and potentially problematic portrayal as a mentally handicapped individual is something we could discuss, but that's an analysis for another day. For most of the film, he's simply misunderstood by the entire group, with Holloway and Quentin sitting at the polls, mothering him and denouncing him as useless baggage respectively. But either way, he's understood by the individuals as being reliant on their guidance. But then, how is he the only one to survive and escape the cube? Beyond his astronomical mathematical abilities, which help solve the final pieces of the puzzle, he doesn't fit into these organizations all the other characters place themselves in relation to. While Quentin is accepting and accepted by the institution, Holloway puts herself in opposition to it. Worth works as a tool of it. Levin is learning its ways in school, and with prison escapee Ren building his identity in opposition to the institution, it is clear that the organizations rule all of these characters' lives. But what about Kazan? He, due to his deviation from the mental normal, is rejected by the organizational society, too unreliable and untethered to be useful as part of its machine. Again, taking the cube as a metaphor for the organizational business world, Mark Featherstone argues that the subjects of this capitalist machine collapse without its provided structure and stability, leading to Quentin, Holloway, Levin, and Ren to all perish, and Worth to be trapped within the organization he so ideologically opposes. As a result, Kazan, the only one not intrinsically tied to these organizations, is the only one able to step beyond the capital's external limit. Having said that, that is merely one way to read the film. Taking a step back from this capitalist critique, scholar Carol Wisniewski suggests reading the cube historically through the world's major religions. By looking at the symbol of the square, used in Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism, she notes the similar function of the square as a shape to denote the earthy, human plane of existence, as opposed to the circle, often referring to the divine. As such, she takes the analysis into a different plane, with the massive cubes, itself one giant cube, being a metaphor for human existence. This reframes the mortal challenges the group face within the cube, both social and in the form of traps, as the challenges of life itself. And, as with life, as they struggle through these challenges, they also attempt to find a higher meaning for it all. Such a reading again resonates with Worth's nihilism, which could be reframed as militant atheism with his line,
It's a headless blunder operating under the illusion of a master plan. Can you grasp that? Big Brother is not watching you.
now denoting a rejection of a higher power in the face of the brutal nature of humanity itself. Such a reading, again, has its repercussions, altering our perception of Kazan being consumed by a bright white light at the film's conclusion, ascending from the human plane to something higher, because Kazan didn't conform to the human traits the others all held of pride, greed, anger, lust, ego, and nihilism. But yet again, we meet a roadblock. In the narrative itself, the character suggests that outside is the real world, something which must be somewhat true, given that Worth designed the shell while outside of the cube. Sheila Kunkel suggests yet another avenue to explore, that of the unconscious. Basing her ideas on the works of Jacques Lacan, she argues, what cube demonstrates is the inadequacy and confining nature of the terms used in traditional physics and philosophy, which are based on merely physical ontologies and rationalized epistemologies. In other words, the understanding of the group as they exist in the human plane, reliant of sensing the physical world around them, is limited. The only way they can truly understand the maze is by deploying an astronomical power, which is held by Kazan. And again, it's important to recognize that Kazan's depiction as mentally handicapped tries its hardest to depict a person whose unconscious spills out into their waking experience. Thus, Kazan's ability to transcend the human or organizational existence where the others perish is down to the fact that he is somewhat separate to the normal human experience. If the human understanding of the cosmos is based on its etymological roots, cosmos being defined literally as order, perhaps the only way to truly understand the cube and the world we inhabit is to acknowledge the fact that our human perception clouds the bigger picture. And only by transcending our human vices and understanding of the world can we possibly escape from its maze and transcend into the unknown, exactly the way Kazan disappears into the white void, free from the grueling constraints of the cube. With that having been said, that's all for today, folks. Don't forget to hit subscribe and click the notification icon to stay up to date on all my content, and if there's anything else you'd like to request, please don't hesitate to ask. As always, it's been a pleasure. Niyat here with Film Comics Explained. Thanks for stopping by.
I looked, and the only conclusion I could come to is that there is nobody up there.
Somebody had to say yes to this thing.
What thing? Only we know what it is.
We have no idea what it is.
We know more than anybody else.
Why put people in it?
Because it's here. You have to use it, or you admit it's pointless.
But it is pointless.
Quentin, that's my point.